I'm happy to help out, Vic. Hopefully we can lower people's expectations just a tad in case I botch this any.
No, I know how you operate. You'll do just fine. They'll love you regardless. Christopher, could you contrast tonight's show, the type of missing persons cases that you're going to be going over compared to the type of cases you're talking about in episode 90 and 91?
Well, in the past we talked about a mixture of missing persons cases, but primarily also attacks by what were described as dogs or unknown animal attacks. And tonight I'd like to talk about what's focused on a combination of missing hunters who were never found and missing hunters who were found under mysterious circumstances, particularly bow hunters. I'd like to stress that this is all preliminary from my research and that I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of this. What I would urge anyone to do would be to simply go to their favorite search engine and type in a term such as missing bow hunters and the name of their state. And I think they're going to be surprised at the number of results that are going to come up.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing you just normally don't think about. I'll bet it would be surprising to see what turns up by doing that.
I think people will be surprised at both the number of cases as well as the fact that this is happening all over the United States. And tonight, if I can just give a snippet of just a few of the cases that I found, I think that there's some patterns that begin to emerge as well as some things to make note of when these cases do happen.
Well, I can't think of anyone better to have on talking about this, so let's dive right into it. The first case I'd like for you to talk about involved Corey Fred in Oregon.
Yes, this happened in October of 2014, so it's a relatively recent case. Corey was 37 years old. He was an experienced hunter. He knew the area he was going to be visiting. He sent out a text message at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning to his friends saying, hey, going hunting. The hunting location being his property, a hunting lease that was next to a large area of state forest land. For whatever reason, because his family did not hear from him by that afternoon, the search started relatively quickly on this one. And one of the things that I found unusual in this case was that it started on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, he was reported missing. By late Monday afternoon, we already had military helicopters in the air, and we had what was described in the papers as a mounted posse involved in the search. So it seemed to me that this was all organized very quickly. And that struck me as being an oddity in this case, that there was no delay, there was no authorities telling his family, oh, well, give him 24 hours to come back. It's almost as though someone knew because of the location he was in to send the units out in force and quickly, or perhaps in the case of the military helicopter units may have already had him in the area for whatever reason. It was noted, and this will be important with some of these cases we get into, that heavy fog covered the area that night, but nonetheless, he was found that night. He was found dead. And what's interesting is that no cause of death was ever released to the public. They never said he had a heart attack. They never said he fell. They never said it was foul play. They just said, oh, we found him. There'll be an autopsy, and then nothing. So this was one of the first cases as I began my own search that struck me as having sufficient oddities that I wanted to remark upon. Because we had the military involvement. We had rapid response by a large number of authorities above and beyond the normal search and rescue operation. And we had military involvement, even though the guy had only been reported missing for literally hours. So it seemed that there were strange events in this case that set it apart from other cases where a hunter may simply get lost in the woods or may lose their map or may get lost.
That is really strange how the responders were so hush-hush on what they found when they found his body.
And usually it takes a while to organize a military operation, particularly one with aviation assets. So it struck me as very strange that they could have helicopters in the air and searching that quickly within a matter of literally hours. It's almost as though they were on call or already in the area or already engaged in a search in that state forest for someone or something else.
It does make you wonder if they knew something. Let's talk about the next case, Christopher. Charles Emerson.
Charles Emerson was in Rochester, Vermont, and he's part of a different subset of hunters. What we'll find is that you'll read reports of usually older hunters, but who are quite experienced, who will go hunting in the woods and simply vanish and be found later, and no cause of death will ever be released. And that's what happened in this case. Charles was 86 years old. He'd been hunting for probably 70 years. He went hunting alone one day, as he had many years in the past, and he simply vanished. Later that day, when he didn't show up at home, his family called the authorities and a search was instituted. Unlike in many cases where canines are not able to find tracks or find a body, in this case, canine did find the body, but at that point it becomes a little strange again because once again we have no cause of death ever being released to the public. No one said in his obituary, no one said, oh, he died of a heart attack, or he fell down, or he had a stroke. It was just, man vanishes, man's often elderly, and we talked before about my theory that those who are seen as weak in the herd may fall prey. And then we have the authorities find him, but then they become all hush-hush regarding the circumstances of the body and what actually led to the death. And I think if people look in their areas, search state by state, everyone can search in their own state or own area, they're going to find a disturbing number of these cases where when a body is found, that no cause of death is ever released and that no further details are ever forthcoming, and that even family obituaries and such will be very vague as to the actual circumstances as to how someone died. Another case involved 37-year-old John Hill out of Oregon. In this case, and again, this was fairly recent, looking back just the last few years, this was September of 2014. What's interesting is he'd gone hunting. He was a bow hunter. He had his supplies. He actually knew the area that he was hunting in, supposedly knew it well. And within a matter of hours of him being out, he placed a phone call saying that he didn't know where he was, that the ground seemed unfamiliar, and that he thought he was lost. It reminded me almost of the Flight 19 story of the Bermuda Triangle lore, where there's the last call saying, everything looks strange, we're lost, I don't understand what's going on. That he placed a call like that saying he was disoriented, and then his phone went out. Now, they found him within a couple days. His body was only a mile from his truck. But what was interesting was, once again, we had the National Guard involved, including aviation units, within a very short time involved in the search. And we have that when they found him, even though it had only been days, it was stated in the press that there were issues with identification of the body because of damage to it. And then there was no follow-up in the press as to what might have caused the damage to his body or what might have happened to him within a matter of days as to render him unidentifiable without relying on dental records and the like. It was also odd that you have a fellow who's only a mile from his vehicle, and yet he's calling in saying he's lost, disoriented, and it's a fairly straight shot from where he was found to where he parked. So it raises some questions to what might have happened in this case.
It really does make you wonder what the last moments of these people's lives were like. I can't even imagine how horrible it must have been for them.
And you also have to wonder why, even though he had a cell phone, even though he was able to get one call out, why it suddenly and abruptly died. And if he had his cell phone, well, wouldn't he have had an app on it with GPS or map software or some ability to get back to his vehicle only a mile away? It just begins to raise questions that I don't think have been answered.
Oh, I agree. If his vehicle was only a mile away, you think his phone wouldn't have any problem with that. Let's talk about the Bernard Reitman case.
Bernard Reitman, I found, was right here in Wyoming. He was out of Cheyenne. This happened in September 2015. This is another case where we have an individual. He was somewhat older, at 85, but he was described as in good health. He was out solo hunting. He was hunting in an area that had drainage ditches. What was interesting in this case is we have an individual who was out solo hunting, following the elk herds. He was hunting in an area of fields that were marked by drainage ditches. So even though he was described as good health, it would have been somewhat difficult for him to go climbing in and out of steep drainage ditches. Yet they found his rifle discarded on one side of a field in the drainage ditch, almost as though it had been discarded in a hurry, and then they found no trail or anything leading across the field. But on the other side of the field, they found his body. And again, no cause of death was ever released, but it just seems strange that an 85-year-old man would quickly climb down one drainage ditch for whatever reason, get rid of his hunting rifle, because rifles are obviously expensive and something that many people become emotionally attached to, run across the field or otherwise be taken across this field, and his body end up in a ditch on the other side. So he would have had to gone down in one ditch, lose his rifle, climb up out of the ditch, run across the field, and climb into another ditch, or be taken in that ditch. And yet again, here we have someone who no cause of death was ever released to the press. Richard Harkins is another case where we have a hunter who goes missing. very quickly we have U.S. military involvement. In this case, it was U.S. Air Force parajumpers, not the National Guard, who were involved. And they're under the United States Special Operations Command. So they're the guys who go in behind enemy lines, rescue down pilots, and go on special missions, that sort of thing. We know that they were involved in the search. It was a total of a 4-day search, and this was in September of 2015. What's interesting in this case, we have signs that the individual, Rick Harking, may have been affected by infrasound, which is it's a frequency below 20 hertz that some people are more sensitive to than others. We know that some predators, such as tigers, release this in their roar when they're hunting. And it's a low-frequency oscillation that travels through the skull and your bone, and it can cause ear ringing, dizziness, palpitation, imbalance, and mimic motion sickness. Other symptoms can be unease, sorrow, fear, chills down the spine, pressure in the chest. So when we hear about people describing things where they feel a literal chill, or they felt their blood run cold, or they just felt something was wrong in an area, it suggests that perhaps we have a predator that's using infrasound. Now, Rick, they tried to say that he was suffering from altitude sickness, but that had different symptoms than he was experiencing, and he was only at 9,000 feet, an altitude he had been at before. So what happened is Rick got sick and agreed to stay at the hunting camp and was separated from his companions, and then it was almost as though he vanished from the camp because his friends came back that afternoon while the rest went out. He was texting them back and forth late afternoon, yet by the time they were retrieved that evening, he was gone without a trace. Linwood David Waters is another case where we have an individual who was somewhat older, but certainly in good health. He was only 61 years old. He was an experienced hunter. He knew the area he was going to hunt in. He goes out hunting alone one Monday and is reported missing. Now, again, in this case, we have a report that it was very specifically United States Air Force parajumpers who were involved in the search, and in this case they found him unresponsive at the scene, with no mention being made in the press as to what his injuries were or were not. They found him within a day of him being gone. So within a day we had the elite of the U.S. Air Force involved in what should have been just a normal missing hunter case, which suggests something a little strange. The parajumpers were actually the ones who pronounced him dead at the scene, and they said that he died of natural causes and then didn't release anything else. This is another one of those cases where it seems strange because of the rapid military involvement and specifically the involvement of elite U.S. Air Force retrieval and rescue units in the case within a very short period of time. Travis Anderson was a younger man. This was, again, recent. This was October of 2014. Travis was out hunting with his father. Travis became separated from his father, complaining that his feet were badly blistered and that he was going to try to make his way back to camp. Travis and his father were keeping in touch with two-way radios, and as late as that afternoon, he called his dad on the radio saying he was at or near a waterfall, and he was just going to sit down there, that he wasn't going to get up until his dad came and got him, and that his feet were too badly blistered to walk anymore. Now, again, in this case, we had, once he was declared missing, when his dad couldn't find him, we had National Guard helicopters, or at least military helicopters attributed to the National Guard, in the air that same day. They found signs of a fire had been lit in a hat about a mile away from the waterfall. And then as the helicopter moved into the nearest waterfall, they found Travis, and they found his body. Now, the official story was that he'd somehow fallen, and yet he said that he was unable to walk further. We've seen that he'd made a campsite about a mile away from the waterfall, and elements of his hat, clothing, and other gear were there, and he had time to make a fire. Yet somehow he was discovered dead over a mile away after he said he couldn't walk another step. And we had the military being involved within a matter of hours yet again, without any effort being made to tell the family, oh, he'll probably walk out or give us a day to see or anything like that. It was almost immediate military involvement.
It sure does make you wonder what's going on with these cases where the government sends in military forces like that almost immediately to help look for the body. They normally don't do that, so it's almost as if they do know something's going on in these areas.
Yeah, it's almost as though there's certain units that are on call or that have this as part of their mission statement here in the continental United States to be prepared to go out on these strange cases. I'm not even sure what to call them I've been terming them events. And this is another case where we have some indication that there was an unusual fog in the area, which I think is worth mentioning. It's the same kind of fog that you hear about in some reports of phenomena in the Bermuda Triangle, where people will say that their plane will fly into a fog, and then there'll be hours of time lost, or other strange things will happen. A lot of the commonalities to all this is these reports of a strange fog, which is also reported all the way back into ancient times in regards to fairy lore and things regarding an underworld or a realm not of this earth. You would find them associated with clean fogs, mysterious mists, and things of that nature. And I think it might be an electromagnetic phenomenon, almost as though wherever these things come from, when they enter where we are, that a gate or portal has to open, or that these things themselves just either wander through it or cause it to be open, or maybe they have no control over it, but that there's some kind of electromagnetic disturbance that takes place in some of these cases where something from elsewhere comes here. And that's just supposition on my part. But yeah, it could also be something as simple as a predator prefers to use the fog to conceal itself. But the mentions of fog and mist has been so consistent. You'll also find it in David Paulides' books regarding missing persons. That I just think it's something that should be looked at or examined more closely than it has been.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I wonder what's behind all that. Let's talk about the Robert Carter case.
Robert Carter disappeared in Montana. Yet again, we have a bow hunter. So we have an individual who either did not have a rifle, or if they had a firearm at all, had only a handgun. And I think that's important because it seems to me that more bow hunters disappear or are found mysteriously dead than rifle hunters. And then when the rifle hunters disappear or are found mysteriously dead, that they're more often to have been older gentlemen or people showing signs of a disability. Here there was an 8-day search, and it took him 8 days to find the body, yet he was found only a mile straight uphill from where he parked his truck. And this was at the Big Hole National Battlefield area where they found him. It was stated that the cause of death was not obvious, and that was all that they said. Nothing further was ever revealed. His family described him as an avid outdoorsman, well-trained in survival. He was hunting alone, and to get back to his truck, all he would have had to do was walk straight downhill. Just follow it downhill, and he would have come to his truck and been able to walk out. So it's almost as though perhaps the body wasn't there the whole time, or it brings to mind a lot of David Paulides' cases. And we've also found a lot of cases of reports of dogmen around cemeteries or where battles had taken place or military installations. So this one is another one that stuck out in my head. It seemed a little strange, to put it mildly.
Another strange phenomenon involves cases around Alberta, Canada. There's a cluster that you mentioned in the pre-interview I'd like to talk about now. The first missing hunter I'd like for you to talk about is Rick Cross.
There seems to have been a whole cluster of weirdness in Alberta, Canada in 2014. There was a hunter, Rick Cross, 54 years old. He was a rifle hunter, not a bow hunter. He was out during a sheep hunting trip. Now, he was found with his rifle laying discarded near his corpse, and the reports in the Canadian press said that they found trauma consistent with a bear attack. In other words, his body was very badly mutilated, torn limb from limb, basically, and partially devoured. The acting theory was that some large predator, it was never revealed why they claimed it was a bear other than the convenience factor of, well, what could have killed him? Well, it must have been a bear. But it seemed as though he'd shot a sheep, he set his rifle down and was going to examine his kill or retrieve it or gut it or otherwise handle it, and that while he was thus occupied, whatever got him wanted his kill, had apparently been following the sheep, and then took him and killed him. Now, in the same area of Alberta, Canada, around the same time, a guy named Ralph Greenaway. He was 40 years old, a hiker, an avid outdoorsman. He was a veteran of the British Parachute Regiment, a well-known base jumper, well-known in adventure sports. He also went missing around the same time, hiking in this area, and he's vanished without a trace. To this day, he still has not been found. But while they were searching for Ralph Greenaway as part of the general search, which did coincidentally involve elements of the Canadian military, they found another body that had apparently had its remains strewn around, but that the skull was intact enough that they could establish the identity by dental records. and they discovered this was a 21-year-old Michael Morissette. And what's interesting is that Michael was missing out of Montreal in Canada, not Alberta, wasn't known to have been going hunting or anything, and as far as anyone could establish, he vanished out of the city, and yet they found his remains here in the wilderness, in the same area where we're searching for a missing hiker, and had someone torn apart near their kill under strange circumstances. Mark Steed I read about this one in the Seattle Times. This was in November of 2015. He was a bow hunter. He was, again, hunting alone. He was by his friends and family, a known survivalist and outdoorsman, and he was a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. He went out on a one-day hunt. His vehicle was found one day, and the next day they found his body exactly 2.5 miles from his truck. Now, he was a big guy, 6 foot 180, in excellent condition, not known to have any health problems. The only thing released about the cause of death was that he had, quote, unquote, fallen. And what's interesting in this case is we know he had his cell phone with him, but there were no calls for help, and there was no formal funeral ever held. It was almost as though the body was not released back to the family, and everyone wanted to just sort of be vague as to what happened in this case, kind of keep the details out of the press. And I found this to be another interesting case, as he was a relatively short distance from his truck. He knew the area. There's nothing obvious that should have killed him, and yet we were told that he, quote-unquote, fell.
How about the Melvin Nadell case?
I believe Melvin Nadell's case is strange enough that David Paulides covered in his books as well. And this fits the profile that's emerging. We have a man who was an experienced outdoorsman. He was a bow hunter. Melvin was actually a first-degree Taekwondo expert, and we know that he had a .44 special revolver that he habitually carried with him on his person as well when he went on a hunting trip with friends. Now, he separated from his friends. They went one way. He stayed back a little ways with the truck and then apparently wandered off on his own, like as though maybe he'd seen an animal or something and was going after it. This is one of those cases that David Paulides mentioned where dogs were able to follow a scent trail only part way. After about 50 yards down the trail, the dogs lost Melvin's scent trail and couldn't establish it. To this day, he's never been found. What I found interesting in this case was that he was a relatively small man. He was 5'2" and 135, and the reason he separated from his friend was he was having some knee problems because he had a wrapped knee. So he actually physically couldn't have wandered off very far without being in pain or disconveniencing himself. But that the same wrapped knee, I thought, might have marked him to an intelligent predator as displaying a weakness that was worth exploiting. And I think that might be the reason that Melvin didn't come back from that hunt, as well as the fact that he went off alone, whereas his friends did.
Because of that wrapped knee, I sure wonder how hindered he was.
I think that the infrasound might be an issue in terms of we might have a predator that's able to confuse its targets, and that this might be reason some of these people report being lost when they do get a phone call out, but that would be speculation on my part. What I would think was that we had something that was smart enough to watch and try and pick the weakest of the group, wait for him to be separated, and pick its time to strike, and then do so suddenly enough that either he wasn't able to get a shot off or that his weapon was ineffective against whatever got it.
If whatever it was, Dogman or something else, was able to take someone like that out, it really makes you wonder what their limits are.
It does. I think we're dealing with something at least as strong, in the case of some of these attacks, at least as strong and capable as an African lion, which would, of course, be something that people here in North America aren't going out equipped to deal with and aren't expecting. And that with a combination of unexpected attack and its own skill set at being a predator, that is why, rather than any supernatural ability, that it's able to take and prevail over even armed humans in some of these cases.
As I listen to you share these cases with us, Christopher, am I to believe that you think most of these might have been caused by dogmen, or is that something that you haven't declared yet?
I would say that there's definitely an unknown predator involved in these cases. I believe it would be more likely to be dogman. We basically have two cryptids described in North America that would fit the profile of something that could do this. One would be Bigfoot, which some people believe in, some don't. But I think as North American cryptids show, that Bigfoot's relatively respectable. And I could see that perhaps being an issue in a few of these cases where, like the sheep hunter, where he was found torn apart near his kill, where perhaps the territorial Bigfoot may have been responsible in terms of taking out the hunter because he got in the way of, basically got between a Sasquatch and his meat. But usually we have in human encounters with Bigfoot, they tend to be more reticent in avoiding humans, whereas we know that Dogman, from various sightings, seems to be stalking humans actively and quite likely preying on humans. So that's why I think Dogman would be a better culprit in some of these cases than anything else. It's also showing a degree of intelligence that would be very unusual, that's at least equal to what a human being would have in terms of being able to identify targets, plan ambushes, and isolate victims.
When you look at their size, speed, strength, and weaponry, it goes without saying that if they chose to do so, it wouldn't be a problem at all to take out even the most formidable human, even with a handgun in most cases, so you just might be onto something there. Let's move on and talk about the Walter Benskin case.
Walter Benskin went missing and his body was later found in October of 2006. Here's another case where the remains were found, but no details were released about it. But what we do know that was interesting in his case was that he was following an elk he had shot. So again, we have an individual who vanishes and then turns up dead, getting in between prey, a large mammal that he shot, and apparently some greater predator that decided to prey on him. And I think what's happening in these cases is individuals will lay their bow or their rifle down, and especially when they're hunting alone, they're not watching the area for anything sneaking up on them. And as they go to process their kill, I believe that's when they're falling victim to whatever is responsible. See, I believe that what's doing this, I don't believe it to be invulnerable. I don't believe it to be supernatural. I think that the very fact it does plan to attack people when they're vulnerable or when they don't have their rifle ready would suggest that it does that because it has to, that it would in fact be vulnerable if someone were watching for it or had someone on overwatch or otherwise were in fact prepared. I think the predator does what it does for a reason, and that reason is its own survival, that it's a defense mechanism. I don't think that they're invulnerable to the efforts of humans or that you need silver bullets or anything like that. I think you just need to be aware and not be caught unawares. Basically have situational awareness, keep your head on a swivel kind of thing. And to have enough guns, basically, because in the cases where we have people where we know to have been armed, you're not hearing of anyone who's really vanishing who's armed with dangerous game rifles or usually large caliber Magnum handguns, the type you use on bears, things that might have presented a risk for these creatures. So even if they had gotten a shot or two off, it could very well not have stopped whatever took them.
I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there's a good chance that whether it's a dogman or Sasquatch that's responsible for these cases, there's a good chance that whatever killed these people wasn't working alone. If they weren't working alone, even if the person was heavily armed, that really makes it a lot easier for whatever it was to take out that person.
Yes, it does, and that adds a whole other dimension to their intelligence as to whether or not they're capable of using tactics and planned ambushes of that nature. That might explain why in some of these cases there seems to have been almost a military response in terms of what was being done to handle the situation.
What's worse than dealing with one dog man? 2, 3, 4, or 5?
Yes, the pack mentality becomes a question of what might be involved in terms of what these people would be up against.
Please tell us about the Jerome Childress case.
Jeremy Childress was 31 years old. He's another individual who went missing in Oregon. This is in the very large Oregon Tillamook State Forest. And he was out hunting with his best friend and his best friend's son. A very heavy fog descended on the area. So they separated when his friend's son became frightened. Now, Jeremy, who was very experienced outdoorsman, he had his rifle, he had his pocket knife, he had his pack of cigarettes. He was sure that he would be able to find the way back to camp, even in this thick fog. So while his friend and the friend's son basically stopped for a little while, Jeremy headed off to pass by. Now, once the fog cleared, his friend and the friend's son made it back to the agreed-upon rendezvous point. But Jeremy, he never made it. And to this day, he still has never been found. He essentially walked into this fog and disappeared. He had his rifle with him, but no rifle shots were ever heard fired. Nobody found a trail of cigarette butts. He certainly had his lighter, yet he never made a fire. It was almost as though he walked into nothing, or as though something in the fog took him. And that was another case with the strange fog, and then someone vanishes into it. Almost like it's the Bermuda Triangle, but here on land and here in an Oregon state forest.
Yeah, with as benign as Oregon is, you wouldn't think that things like that would happen there, but as time goes by, I'm finding out more and more things like that have happened there.
Yes, there's been quite a few missing hunter cases I found that are in Oregon or other settled areas. You wouldn't expect Vermont to be a hotbed of danger either, and yet you have individuals going into the field and either dying suddenly or disappearing.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising to me. Let's talk about the Don Allen Peters case.
Don Allen Peters was another case that happened up in Alberta. It was a few years before the Alberta cluster we talked about previously. This happened in November 2007. He was found only 200 meters from where he parked his truck. He's a bow hunter, and due to Canadian firearms laws, he probably didn't have a handgun with him. Again, he was found with his remains eaten by a large predator, torn apart and partially devoured. Now, the story released to the press was that it was probably a bear that had torn him apart. However, a bear researcher pointed out to the media that this seemed odd, as he had been researching the bears in that area during this time and had found that all the bears seemed to be hibernating. There was also reports in this area that there may have been wolves, which is our possible dogman connection, as there have been sightings of what were reported to be large gray wolves and prints and such found in the area. I think this is another case where someone got what they were hunting, but then something was hunting them and waited till they were distracted, and the hunter became the hunted.
Because of their size and weaponry, I wouldn't be surprised at all if dogmen killed their victims in a very similar way to how bears kill theirs. When you look at the long claws, the powerful jaws, and their size, I'll bet you they're very similar.
Yes, I think that the type of dogman that individuals often refer to as a werewolf, that kind of looks like something out of the underworld, the Van Helsing movie, I think with the reach it's got, the claws, and the dexterity of its fingers, it's definitely capable of ripping a man apart. And it's going to have some reach to it with its claws. Its mouth is definitely not the only thing you need to worry about.
Yeah, I can't think of any other way that would be worse to go out than that. Is there anything you can think of, Christopher, that these people could have done to avoid being killed the way they were, besides just deciding not to go out into the wilderness in the first place?
A lot of times people write and ask me if all this means they should not go in the woods, not go camping, not go hunting, etc. And no, I don't think that's the case. While these things do happen, I don't think that they happen all that often. Otherwise, they'd be even better known than what they are. I think that one of the most important things is when you want to go outdoors, be it hunting, hiking, fishing, camping, whatever, is not go alone. It seems like when bad things happen to individuals who were first in line, who get separated, or who are last in line, I think that a lot of the ways that people could enjoy the outdoors is just make it a group activity. Bring a friend, bring several people, and just be aware of your surroundings. And I think it's a good idea to just recognize that there are still predators present in the woods of North America. I believe that there's a relatively unknown dangerous predator preying on humans, but even if you don't want to accept that, there are still known animals and known hazards such as bears, mountain lions, and particularly other humans. So it'd be a good idea to just maintain awareness of your situation and your surroundings. And if you're experienced enough to do so, and it's legal where you are, to consider being armed when out and about.
Oh, I think that's really good advice. What would you have to say, though, to the people who responded after listening to your first two shows by saying it's one heck of a leap for you to jump to the idea that it is dogmen that are out there killing these people?
Ironically enough, I actually used to, when I first read David Paulides' books, I actually used to email him and try and pick apart some of his cases, saying, well, in this case, don't you think it could have been this, that, or the other with natural explanation? And to this day, I'm sure that some of the cases covered in his books were there that did have other explanations, but I think he eventually got tired of dealing with me and he stopped emailing me back. He just basically said, look at the pattern and look for the patterns that begin to emerge in these cases. And I would say the same thing is happening here, that we have unusual fogs, we have military involvement, we have people being taken unawares, we have people being taken when they're alone, and that we have a large number of cases of dog attacks, as we mentioned in the last 2 episodes, that might not be conventional dog attacks, that just seem to have certain elements of the strange about them, including cases where it seemed as though there've been missing animals or domestic animals preyed upon and an unknown predator had been present in the area. So I would urge people to certainly do their own research and try to look for themselves to what cases they can find and start to look for things that fit this pattern. And once you see the pattern, that's when it becomes a lot less of a leap and you realize something very strange has been going on.
I couldn't agree more. The more you look into this phenomenon, the more it becomes clear that something out of the ordinary is definitely going on here. Christopher, I know after the first 2 shows we did, you've been contacted by people who are asking you how they could tell if one of these things might be in their area. What would you say to that?
Well, I certainly invite any listeners who are interested or have questions to go ahead and drop me an email. I answer all my emails, and that's at dogmanevents@gmail.com. I try to keep it easy and simple to remember. But in terms of those who worry about these in their areas, I think dogman sightings in general are vastly underreported. I think that while people are willing increasingly to come forward, thanks to all the media attention it's gotten, and report things like, I think I saw Bigfoot, that people are still not willing to come out and say, oh, I think I saw a werewolf. So things I'd be on the lookout for if someone wonders if something strange is going on would be, have there been any police warnings or warnings from the DNR or Natural Resources or Game Commissioner or whatever their state agencies are about staying out of an area because of predators, warnings about escaped animals, unusual livestock deaths, unusual disappearances of pets, unusual cases of missing hikers, pretty much the usual trappings into what might be the beginning of a horror movie, might be also a warning in real life that, hey, maybe there's something in this area. And also to look for areas like roads or land being blocked off with an unusual sudden military or police presence may also be an indicator of strange things lurking in the woods.
Those are all good indicators. There's another case that we didn't go over I'd like for you to touch on now involving one Douglas Moore out of Texas.
Yes, Douglas Moore, I actually don't have the date written down in my notes, and I apologize to your listeners for that. But what happened in this case is Douglas Moore was found in Cherokee County, Texas. He was found with a single large puncture wound in his thigh. There was an area of deer blood in front of him, so it looked as though he was basically stooped over his kill or otherwise processing a deer he killed. His rifle was found unloaded nearby with no casings in it. So it seemed as though he was doing this one standard hunter safety practice of unloading your weapon before you try and process your kill. And then whatever wanted his kill, in this case his deer, was able to take him and somehow concentrated on a single area of anatomy, killed him with a single puncture to his thigh, and then stole his kill. So it's another one of those cases where a hunter meets an unfortunate end in the woods that's gone out hunting alone, and the totality of the circumstances just suggests certain underlying strangeness.
So it appeared that something had wounded his femoral artery, causing him to bleed out then.
Yes, whatever did it was very focused in its attack. He had a single puncture wound, almost as though it either had an idea of human anatomy or knew a weak point to strike.
Wow, that is really strange. I wonder how he met his end. I wonder what it was. It kind of sounds like it might have been a chupacabra, but if blood was found at the scene of the crime, then it wouldn't make sense that that's what it would be. Did they definitely mention whether they did or did not find blood?
His blood was at the scene as though he'd bled out rather than that the blood had been removed. So it seemed more like a targeted attack by something that wanted his prey, because the deer carcass was then gone. So it seemed like something wanted that deer, or may have already been tracking it, and he got in the way.
Oh, I see. Well, Christopher, it's about time to get out of here. I can't thank you enough for coming back on and sharing these cases with us.
It was my pleasure, Vic. I'm glad to be able to fill in tonight and to start getting some of this preliminary research out there just so that people can be aware of what might be out there in the woods.
Well, we really do appreciate your time and you doing that. Thanks again so much and have a great night.
Sure, Vic. Anytime. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, I've got two things I want to go over. On Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, YouTube versions of new shows are going to premiere, and the podcast format of those shows aren't going to be premiering until the following Wednesday. So if you want to catch shows as soon as they're available, you'll have to tune into the YouTube channel, Dogman Encounters YouTube channel, and check them out that way. If you want to listen to the shows using a podcast format, you'll have to wait until the following Wednesday to do that. The second thing is, if you're not subscribed to the Dogman Encounters YouTube channel, I'd highly recommend you do that now, because I released a special YouTube-only show titled The Shenango Valley Werewolf you should really check out. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. Tonight's guest is Terry Ann. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vic.
Thanks for being here. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm 51. I'm married with 2 kids. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I am a foundational practitioner of reconnective healing. I've had encounters and experiences all my life with the strange, scary, and otherworldly, from ghosts and spirits to UFOs and extraterrestrials. And you could say that my life path chose me, and I've spent many years researching and or investigating the paranormal.
It's funny you mentioned that. I can't explain it, but for some people it just seems to me like they're a magnet for these sorts of things.
Yeah, I feel that I have attracted experiences to me, not because I've asked for them, but they've just always been a part of my life from my earliest memories.
It's hard to understand why it's that way, but that does seem to be the case. Did you know how common the whole dogman on a roof scenario is before talking with me?
Absolutely not. And before I encountered Dogman Radio, I really didn't give much thought to Dogman at all.
Well, that's only natural. That's not something that you would think about in a day-to-day situation in everyday life, so that's no surprise. For the listeners, after you hear Terry Ann talk about her son Dylan's encounter, you'll understand why I threw that question at her. Terry Ann, please give us a description of Hamilton.
Well, Hamilton has a population of approximately 520,000 people. It's on the western end of the Niagara Peninsula, and it wraps around the westernmost part of Lake Ontario. Basically, it's halfway between Buffalo and Toronto. The Niagara Escarpment is a long escarpment that runs through the United States and Canada, predominantly east-west from New York State through Ontario, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And the escarpment is most famous as the cliff over which Niagara River plunges at Niagara Falls. The escarpment runs through the middle of the city of Hamilton, basically bisecting Hamilton into an upper and lower part. And the feature about the Niagara Escarpment found in its Ontario portion is the Bruce Trail, which is a continuous 740-kilometer or 460-mile footpath. So where we live is at the base of the escarpment, and we are about a 5-minute walk to the Bruce Trail, and our house is on a main road near the city center.
There are a lot of people listening to the show tonight, Terry Ann, who don't know what an escarpment is.
An escarpment is basically a ridge of sedimentary rock that has formed. At its highest part here in Ontario, it's over 1,000 feet tall. So it's basically a wall of rock.
A pretty unique feature. What were your thoughts on cryptids before your son's encounter?
Well, Bigfoot, I always believed in Bigfoot from the time when I was little at the drive-in watching the Boggy Creek Monster. I've always been kind of fascinated with them. I, looked into the Loch Ness Monster and all the other kinds of cryptids that you hear about, although Dogman wasn't something that I really heard a lot about. It was more of just a general interest than anything.
Oh, I see. The main reason why you're here tonight is to talk about your son Dylan's encounter. How old was Dylan when he had that encounter?
About 3.5 years old.
Ew, that's just way too young. Way too young. Did you go crazy researching Dogman after his encounter that night?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, after the encounter happened and I looked out of the window and I listened to him and he even tried to draw teeth and nails for me, or claws rather, I don't know, I put it away in some section of my mind and I really didn't think about it at all. I would go through the years, I would find that I would ask him if he remembered his experience, and I would ask him again, what did you see? What do you remember? What did it look like? And as he grew up and started to articulate better, it filled in more, but it was always consistent, his story. But it really wasn't until I came across Dogman Encounters Radio and started listening that, I don't know, that place that I had put that experience became unlocked, and I've just been researching ever since. I've listened to every episode of your show. I've just spent a lot of time looking into it now.
Yeah, an experience like that will tend to have that sort of effect on you. How did your son's encounter change your life?
Well, it was another confirmation for me that reality is really stranger than fiction and that these other beings do exist. It has helped to expand my consciousness because I'm forced to question my beliefs. And even though I feel like I live in a world full of strange things, some things are easier to accept than others. But I think it's predominantly helped me to grow more in my awareness.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've got to tell you, Terry Ann, when you told me about Dylan being 3.5 when he had this experience, in a way, I was somewhat glad to hear about that age. I hate the idea that he had to have that encounter, but when you have a kid who's that young have an experience like that, the odds of that kid forgetting that encounter somewhere down the road are a lot higher, of course, than if he or she was 6 or 7 or 8. I'm hoping that sometime down the road Dylan can forget about this, but of course that's yet to be seen. Let's talk about the details of his encounter now. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, this was approximately around 2006, early evening. The kids were upstairs, my son and daughter, in my room, watching TV. They were sitting on my bed. The bed is a king-size bed, and it butts up to the wall, and as wide as the bed is, there's 3 windows that are just as wide as the bed. And he said that he was sitting there, and he heard a tapping at the window, and he turned around, and he saw this very large wolf looking down at him. He said that the head of it took up the whole upper pane of the middle window. He said it was just looking at him. He said that the head he said it was very large. He said the ears went straight up and they were pointy, and he described them as being opened up. They were facing out and to the side, like you could see the insides of them. And he said that he remembers that the ears were moving around a bit, like as if they were listening to things. The eyes, he said, were dark yellow, maybe with some green in them. He said the nose was long and looked like a German shepherd's snout. And he said when it breathed, it steamed the window. With regards to the teeth in the mouth, he said that he had seen big canine teeth, but he said that the mouth wasn't really open. When I asked him to describe it, he just opens his mouth slightly, just as if the dog man was just maybe breathing, wasn't growling or snarling or anything like that. The fur and the color, he said, was dark gray to black, and it had hair all over it, but it was short. But he could see the muscles bulging under the fur, and he made a comment about its waist and that he could see the muscles of its abs. As far as the hands go, he said that they were really strange looking, and that the fur ended basically at mid-knuckle. And he was adamant when I would say, what did the nails look like? He corrects me and says, they were not nails, they were claws. At some point after he had stared at it for I'm not sure how long, he said that it jumped down from where it was on the second floor, just on a little overhang below the window. It jumped down onto our driveway, and that's when he could see the lower half of the dog man. And he said that the legs were bent backwards. I come to realize that they're referred to as hocks now. But he said that the legs were bent backwards and that it had a tail. The hair on the tail was longer than what was on the body, and that the tail curved up, but it didn't like curl or anything, but it curved up. And he said that it looked back at him after it had jumped down, and that's when he started to call for me. He started calling Wolf, and he started calling for me, for Mummy. When I did ask him about how tall it might have been based on a tree we have in the front yard, from what I can gather, it was probably no more than 6 feet tall. And he said after he started to call for me, it turned around and on 2 legs walked, he said, quickly down the middle of the road. And it was gone. The one thing about this that really made me think was when he called me and I ran upstairs. He was 3.5. At the time, he was really having troubles with his W's, his R's, his L's. And he tried so hard, Vic, to articulate that there was a wolf on the roof. And he kept, I can hear him now trying to say, woof, roof, like really trying his hardest to tell me that there was a wolf there. Like, I had no doubt that he saw what he saw. And what was interesting when I asked him, like, how could you see it? It was nighttime out. He very quickly answered that the TV was on. And I said, well, didn't your sister see it? And he said, well, no, because she was lying there on her stomach with her chin in her hands. And when he said that, it immediately caused a flashback in my mind that that's how she used to lie, to watch TV. She would lay there, so she wasn't paying attention at all. And his answers just came so quickly and fluidly, like it just all made sense.
Well, when they're telling the truth, it all does make sense. Having said that, though, because of how extraordinary the tale was, the description of what he said he saw, was there ever a split second where you doubted him?
Maybe, but only for a split second, because I grew up having plenty of experiences, and mostly I was alone and very much doubted. Because I have had so many experiences, I only doubted him for a brief second because I've had so many experiences, I have no choice but to be open.
I want you to understand that that's not a loaded question. Your feelings are what they are. I'm not judging you, and I hope no one else judges you for at least that split second having a little bit of doubt as to whether or not that did happen. That's just totally normal. I will share this with you, though. If that experience did have to happen to him, I am so glad that he's got a mother like you instead of someone who's just closed-minded and someone who won't back him up or support him. That's really good.
Yeah, me too. And, with me doubting him, I can really understand, because I've had such crazy stuff happen to me and I can still doubt. I can appreciate how when I'm telling people closest to me, who know that I speak my truth, I don't embellish, I can appreciate if it's so far-fetched for them because they haven't had the experience. I can understand that, they want to believe me, but probably doubt. So, in a way, I kind of am getting a feeling from both sides.
There's nothing wrong with that. One aspect of this that I don't understand is Dylan told you after the fact that he thought that dogman was there to protect him. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the fantasy part of my mind, I certainly would like to think that. And I certainly believe in guardians of one form or another, although I can't say that I've ever had any personal encounters with any. I'm glad that he thinks of it that way rather than being plagued with nightmares or anything else. So if that's how he's able to go through, the remainder of his life, I'm sure he'll always remember the encounter. But if it doesn't have him rattled, I think that's a really good thing.
Oh, no, I agree. If he has to have an experience like that, I'm so glad that it was one that he saw as being a good one instead of one that terrified him. That's about the only good thing that we can take from this.
Yeah, because beforehand, like when he had the experience, I never, at that age, when the kids were that young, I kept all of my study to myself. I wasn't watching shows in front of them. I wasn't exposing them to any of this subject matter. So when he saw what he saw, it's because he saw what he saw. It's not because he had watched a whole bunch of werewolf movies or even movies on Bigfoot or anything like that. There was no basis to what he was saying except for what he actually saw.
Even though he put a positive spin on his encounter, I'll bet going out at night was never the same for you after that.
Really, when it happened, I compartmentalized it right away and put it away. I put it away. I really didn't think consciously a lot about it. Subconsciously, perhaps. But at first, it didn't really affect me.
It wasn't really until you had plenty of time to sit down and think about it that it did, I take it.
Yeah, and that's when I came across your radio show and started listening, and that's when all the pieces started falling into place, all the anomalies that have happened since his experience that have really made me start to wonder and have definitely curbed what I do now. And even in the past, some of the thoughts that I would just randomly have appear in my head that I couldn't really explain why these thoughts were there. And now I think it's maybe just because this subject was starting to, rear its head.
Yeah, it is really alarming how common these experiences are becoming for people. It's just one of those things that's just so hard to understand about all this. Who was the first person you told about his encounter?
I think it was my husband. It might have been my best friend. But like I said, it really wasn't something. I mean, it happened, and then it was pretty well gone from my consciousness for a while. But every few years, I would find myself asking him, Dylan, do you remember? What did it look like? And I would keep visiting back on that. But I really didn't talk a lot about it.
When I ask a question like that, it would seem like a no-brainer that you would say your spouse, but depending on how that spouse is wired, it's not all that uncommon to have a situation where the person, such as you in your situation, would know that talking to your spouse about that wouldn't be a good idea. If you have a closed-minded significant other, it makes perfect sense that you would tell your sister or a brother or someone else. So that's why I threw that question at you.
Yeah, I couldn't be with someone who had a closed mind because I've had such crazy experiences, and he's aware of them, and yeah, he's open to it. He doesn't investigate it like I do, but he certainly has had his own weird things that might have happened, or he's been around when things have happened that over the years, I think I'm training him.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. It's really good that he's got such an open mind to such things. It sounds to me like Dylan's got one heck of a support system in place.
Yeah, I think so too.
It might seem hard to believe that this could be so, but I want to ask you anyway, was this encounter beneficial to you in any way?
It was because it helped to confirm that reality is stranger than fiction, that these beings do exist. It helped my consciousness to grow more, because whenever you're faced with something that just doesn't fit, it really makes you question your beliefs. And the belief is really only a thought that we keep on thinking. And when we're faced with something, we have to think about it in a different way, and that just opens us up and expands us more. And I think it all just helps to introduce a world that maybe we haven't been told really exists. In fact, I believe it does, and it's just another experience that I add to my resume, I guess, and it's just added further things for me to research.
That's normally how it goes. Have you had or heard about any other dogman incidents at your home or in your area?
Not from anyone else, no. No, I haven't. And yeah, it's not a topic that I freely will bring up, although I was at a party and dropped a line of, "Oh, I've got to leave now. It's still a little light out. I just want to see if there's any dog men around on my drive home." And the reaction that I got was, "Dog man? What are you talking about? You talking about a head of a dog?" Like, it was just, no one in the group, which was a pretty wide cross-section of society that was in attendance, there were no bites to that.
I'm not surprised by that, but from what you told me in the pre-interview, you have had experiences around your home that were pretty strange.
Oh, yes. Personally, for myself, yes, I've experienced some stuff. This happened after Dylan had his experience. There's been a number of times over the years where, out of nowhere, I will hear a big bang on the house. Just one bang, not a bunch of bangs, just one bang. Not the sound of a child kicking a ball against the wall or anything like that, but a bang with some real force behind it. And I've often wondered, what the heck is making my house sound like that. And after listening to your episodes, I heard that the dog man will bang on a house or throw a dead animal, though I haven't found any dead animals right beside my house. But, it's left me wondering. Also, I go out every night because I smoke. And so I'm out sometimes late at night, depending on what I'm doing. And there have been a number of times where when I'm outside, or sometimes just going to go outside and I've opened the door, I have been stopped in my tracks because the feeling that has come over me has been like full-on flight. Like, all I want to do is get in the house now. Out of nowhere, I could be sitting there just minding my own business, and then not a sound. It's not like I'm smelling something or hearing anything or seeing anything, but all of a sudden, I just want to go into the house now. And the interesting thing about all of this is that since I've been researching, obviously preparing for this interview, I've been talking to my husband. And when I told him about that part, he shared with me that over the years, he's also a few times has been out here in our shed and has maybe heard a noise. Now, we've got lots of raccoons and skunks and possums that walk around at night. It's not uncommon. Cats and heat. It's not uncommon to hear things. But he shared with me that there's been a few times where the hairs have stood up on the back of his neck, and he's just felt like he has to finish up what he's doing right now and get inside. And that's something that he's never shared with me until just recently. So whether it's just conjecture on my part or not, I don't know, but I find it interesting.
You wouldn't believe how many times I've spoken with eyewitnesses who went out to take a late-night smoke break only to have an encounter like that. In your research of dogmen, did you find out anything that shocked you about them, other than the fact that they exist?
Well, I was pretty shocked at just how many encounters there actually have been, how widespread they really are. And there's one thing that I don't know and that I am wondering about, and maybe you can answer for me. Do dog men, has it been kind of linked to them that they will just kill animals but not eat them? Like they'll leave a path of death in their wake, or am I mixing them up with another cryptid?
Oh no, they seem to do that a lot.
Because, that's not a real, most animals in the wild kill because they are eating it. And so I guess it's a little unnerving hearing that, dog men will just kill for killing's sake.
Yeah, they do seem to do that all the time. In fact, it's gotten to the point where it seems like that's the norm instead of the exception. If they do kill a pet or something like that, a farm animal, in most cases it would seem that they do that and just leave the body without consuming it. Yeah, it's hard to understand. In 1992, you had an interesting experience in an apple orchard. Please tell us about what happened.
Yeah, this was located in Barrie, Ontario, which is about 2 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours away from me, north of me. It was on 50 acres of a privately owned apple orchard. It was Halloween. It was around 92. It was either 91 or 92. And this location that I was at, I have to say, was the most hands-down haunted location I have ever been to my entire life. This place was just crazy. And it was during the day, and a friend and I were taking a walk through the forest that bordered on the property, and we came upon a section of really dense thicket that was littered with bones. And these were big bones, like a cow or horse or a really big dog. And we were speculating as to what we were looking at. We figured that a neighboring farmer, maybe that's where he dumped his dead animals. I don't know what you do with farm animals when they die, but here we were standing in the middle of this dumping ground, it seemed, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we heard a loud, deep growl sound. This sound was so intense. I can feel the feeling in my body now. The sound resonated in my body. Now I stand at 5 feet tall, and I swear that when this sound happened, it scared me so badly that I literally sprang 4 feet to where my friend was standing. I practically landed on top of him. Needless to say, we got out of the area right away, and I didn't wander too far after that. The sound was intense. It was intense.
Oh, I believe it. When they want to intimidate, they sure are good at doing that. Did that experience sour you on the woods at all, or were you able to go right back in?
No, I was able to go right back in. I was able to go right back. Not the same day, and not into those woods. But, you know, as I went through my life, it didn't stop me from going camping or biking in the forest or whatever.
Oh, well, that's good then. You do paranormal investigating as a hobby. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, part of the research that I do, there's a lot of subjects that I research on, and some stuff I just research, and some things I investigate as well. So I've done a lot of paranormal investigating as far as ghosts or spirits are concerned. I've been to like the Ohio State Reformatory and Rolling Hills Asylum and other locations that are, you know, less well known, and have captured lots of EVP, which is electronic voice phenomena for those that might not know. That's when you can capture sounds on a recording when there's no other sounds around. It's like the recording can pick up a higher audible range. And my investigating with the paranormal has led me into researching now on dogmen.
As a direct result of you investigating the dogman phenomenon, you turned up some interesting material regarding cynocephaly in dogmen. From what I understand, you think there's a link between the two. Please tell us about that.
It's just my own thoughts because of the subjects that I've spent my time exploring, such as ancient aliens, extraterrestrials, mythologies and religions, and the paranormal in all of its glory. It seems to be a common thread through all of these subjects where you can find references to dogmen. So the first thing I came up with when I started researching it was a reference to cynocephaly. Cyno means dog and cephalus means head. And it seems that from what I found, the references seem to be talking about different types of cynocephaly or dogmen. They range from vicious killers to saintly beings. Obviously, you have Anubis in the Egyptian pantheon, and Anubis was often depicted as a warrior. There were other gods that I wouldn't even try to pronounce that had jackal, wolf-like heads as well. 14 Times, which is a magazine, in April of 2012, featured the strange history of dog-headed men. And in that, it mentions about the deserts of western Libya, where there are 5 different sites of rock carvings that are approximately 4,000 years old. And animals like giraffes and elephants are accurately depicted. But in one location, one of the carvings shows 2 dog-headed men dragging away the body of a rhino. And in the article it says, or possibly using magic to control it. Another site has a carving that shows a dog-headed human carrying a club with a dog-headed baby at its feet. Another carving shows a dog-headed man carrying a bison on its shoulders. And what's interesting is that this all seems to be backed up by early writing, because somewhere between 450 and 420 BC, Herodotus writes about locating dog-headed men in Libya that lived in the forests. And then we have the Greek doctor Ctesias, who was the doctor to the king of Persia in the last years of the 4th century BC. And he wrote of dog-headed men. He was quoted as saying, "On these mountains there live men with the head of a dog, whose clothing is the skin of wild beasts. They speak no language but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Their teeth are larger than those of dogs, their nails like those of these animals, but longer and rounder. They inhabit the mountains as far as the river Indus. Their complexion is swarthy. They are extremely just, like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate. They understand the English language, but are unable to converse, only barking or making signs with their hands and fingers by way of a reply, like the deaf and dumb. They are called by the Indians Kalistri. In Greek, it's cynocephaly. They live on raw meat, and they number about 120,000. So that's the end of the quote. From the Middle Ages comes one of the most famous works, the Romance of Alexander, which is a collection of legends concerning the mystical exploits of Alexander the Great. In there, it featured dog-headed men as warlike man-eating giants, and they were considered one of the unclean races that also included the Amazons and the biblical peoples of Gog and Magog. Published around 1300 in the travelogue of Marco Polo, he wrote of an unnamed island in the Indies that, quote, all the men of this island have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes like dogs. For I assure you that the whole aspect of their faces is that of big mastiffs. They are a very cruel race. Whenever they can get a hold of a man who is not one of their own, they devour him, end of quote. Christian theologians, such as St. Augustine, debated about the existence of dog-headed races, and there are images of St. Christopher with a dog's head. And what makes me think that perhaps they're associated with dogmen is because you've got some nice ones, you've got some mean ones, but I've come across even more stuff. In 1969, there was a Dutch book written by Stefan Denarden called Alien Civilization. And he writes about how he encountered short aliens with dog-like faces and gray skin from the planet Iagra. They had a single collective mind rather than individual minds, and values echoing the missionary dog-headed saints of medieval theology, like St. Christopher. So here we have an entirely different set that could explain how a lot of the biblical illuminated drawings, there's interactions with these dog-headed people, and perhaps there's different species. Hunting the American Werewolf, the author Linda Godfrey described her email correspondence with Noah, who claimed to be a remote viewer who had viewed the Bay Road, Wisconsin man-wolf cluster area. This allegedly revealed to him that a scout cast of subterranean, 7-foot-tall, extraterrestrial, Anubis-type cyborg warriors with bioengineered armor under their fur had been left behind after a war with another cyborg race for control of the Earth many aeons ago. Godfrey concedes that there is an absence of tangible proof for Noah's claims. But then I came across a Native American named Robert Morning Sky, and he produced a work many decades ago entitled The Terra Papers, The Hidden History of Planet Earth. And here he gives his theory about the different races from different star systems that at one time or another had control or fought for control of the Earth. He talks about when the Aryan Empire were in control, and the Aryans were reptilians from Orion. And he speaks about the unexpected evolution of another race in the star system Sirius that posed a threat to the Aryan Empire. Though not as old or as advanced as the reptilians, the warriors of the Canus Empire, a dog-like race similar to wolves, made up for any lack with their fierceness. Even the most disciplined of the Aryan warriors feared these vicious and barbaric Syrian warriors who stopped to devour the flesh of their enemies on the battlefield. So I find it all interesting because you have all of these references from different people coming from different angles, but when you keep digging, you find that there's references from an entirely different angle that might seem out of this world, but it seems to lend credence to what the other people are saying. I mean, that's as far down the rabbit hole as I've gone. but that's what I found out in my research.
A lot of the things you just shared with us are hard to believe. That goes without saying. But that doesn't mean that they aren't necessarily true. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm not saying that they're not true, but how much of this do you believe yourself? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm curious to find out.
I think I've already said it right from the beginning. I really have had such crazy encounters. I've seen UFOs. I've had what I believe to be extraterrestrial, or I even now, at this point in my life, I'm leaning towards interdimensional encounters with beings. I can't not believe in it. I mean, I try and keep myself in check as much as possible, but it's really hard when you come across something that is real and in your face. It doesn't really matter what anyone else says about it. You know the truth. You know what you believe because you've had the experience.
There's nothing like seeing for believing, so I can understand that. Shifting gears here, you found out that there's a U.S. Army werewolf sniper manual. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I came across this in addition through my research, and so I started to look it up. I was actually a little bit excited when I saw it. I just thought, wow, this is real confirmation. You can purchase this on Amazon. It's called the U.S. Army Werewolf Sniper Manual, Department of the Army. Apparently, it has 100 plus illustrations of werewolf tracking and sniping techniques and equipment. But then the cover of it has fur. But I did more digging into that, and I found an archived thread on a website where somebody was asking what was up with this manual. And apparently someone responded that it is verbatim for the U.S. Army's sniper manual, except that they've added werewolf or lycanthrope in here and there. But otherwise, it's identical, picture to picture, word to word. Although I really believe that the military or those secret groups know about a lot of stuff, I don't think that there's a lot of credence to this specific manual. I think it's more of a, somebody's putting it out, let's make some money.
Yeah, that's quite likely what's going on there. Although what I wouldn't give to find out what exactly the government does know about this whole dogman phenomenon. That would be a really good read.
Yeah.
You know that would. You talked about going down the rabbit hole with the whole cynocephaly topic, but we're really about to head down the rabbit hole with this next topic I'm about to ask you about. And that is, you go to a hunt camp every year. Last year when you went, you heard a strange woo-hoo sound. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, this is a hunt camp about 200 miles north of us. It's very, very remote. It's quite an effort just to get to the camp, surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of acres of just dense forest and swamp. We're the only cabin on the entire lake. There is another cabin on a lake which is right beside ours, but I'm not aware that anyone was up at the time of what happened to us. So my husband and I were at the campfire one night, and all of a sudden, I saw a red orb come. It just came from the area of the cabin, and I tracked it in front of my eyes. Like I tracked it, it seemed like it was just to the side of the side of my vision, and I tracked it until it went into the forest. It was quite large, I don't know, the size of an apple or something, and I was quite surprised by it all because, well, I wasn't expecting to see a red orb in the middle of nowhere, and my husband actually said that he had just noticed an orb on the top of the cabin, but had put it off to, we had the wood burning stove going on the inside, so maybe it was embers coming out. Later on, still sitting outside, we heard two separate times, maybe a half an hour apart, 20 minutes apart from one sound to another. We heard in the distance it sounded like woohoo or ooh-hoo, or it just had that woo sort of sound. It sounded really loud, but it sounded really far away. But it was loud, but it was far away. Like we knew that it was far away, but we were really surprised because we couldn't figure out where that could possibly have been coming from because we are so secluded up there. And then later that night, I went to bed and woke up middle of the night. There's this cabin. There's just nothing around, and you can hear a mouse walk. And I looked out the window that was across from me on the other side of the cabin, and the window was lit up with red and white lights. And they were moving back and forth, and I can't remember if they were moving up and down horizontally or side to side vertically. But it was red and then white and then red and then white and then red and then white. And I stared at it long enough until I couldn't help myself. I had to go and look. I went outside. Surprisingly, especially with my experiences with UFOs and whatnot, I never looked up in the sky, but I never saw anything either. And I went in the house and went to bed. Oh, one thing I want to add, that where that window was, if you were to stand on the outside of the cabin facing that window, in order to look into the window, well, it's a good 7 or 8 feet off the ground from where there's a steep hill that runs almost right away from the cabin. After I had come in, I fell asleep, and I had the strangest dream where I was with a bunch of people and we went into a place that had the most beautiful looking food I've ever seen in my life. I never in my life have ever described food as beautiful before. But here it was. Here I was with these people and this most incredibly beautiful food. The people I was with, they immediately started to eat the food, and immediately me in the dream, I just knew there was something wrong. I knew to stay away from the food. I knew not to eat or drink anything. And I knew that I had to get out. I left the hall where this food was. There was some short, round men. I said, I have to go. I can't be a part of this. And they said, well, that's what happens when you eat. And I said, what's that? And there was a mirror there. And I looked in the mirror, and the next thing I know, it was like I had aged hundreds of years. And I woke up from the dream. And immediately, what I thought about was all the stories that I've heard about with regards to, you know, the fairy folk or, you know, the underworld, where you really aren't supposed to eat or drink anything lest you be trapped. So, I mean, I know that really isn't Dogman, and the only part of that that really is Dogman related is, you know, the woo-hoos that I heard, but it certainly adds to my now increased nervousness when I go out.
Well, after you talked about what your son's been through and after your experiences, I think we could all understand why you'd have some apprehension about going out into the woods now. That dream does sound like a pretty strange one, by the way. I'm not the one to make fun of you because I know I've had my fair share of awfully strange ones too, but why don't you think it was a person that had made that woohoo sound?
Well, because it was really far away, the sound, and we hadn't heard, in the time that we were there a week, we hadn't heard any other people around, any gunshots, which is, even though it wasn't hunting season, when you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's very easy to set up targets and just practice. And we're just so far away from anyone that it just really seems odd that it would have been someone. And if it was a bunch of guys in the other cabin and the other hunt camp that's on the other lake, then there'd be more than one woohoo, because then it would be sort of in line with them perhaps drinking and woohoo, and, you know, and one starts and the other starts and you get a bunch of rowdies going on. But that wasn't the case. It was just a single sound. And then there was nothing else. And then 15 minutes, 25 minutes later, we heard it again. I think we went in shortly after that.
I can't say I blame you. You mentioned the orbs of light you saw. I don't understand it, but orbs of light like that are commonly associated with Dogman and Sasquatch encounters. Did you know that?
I knew about Sasquatch, but not so much about Dogman.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I had heard about Sasquatch, but now that it's Dogman too, it just all becomes more unnerving, because I've had these experiences like the time in the apple orchard. That happened around Halloween. Now I've listened to some of your episodes, and it seems like sometimes these things are seen around Halloween. So I find that it's interesting that in my brief little encounters, that my encounters match up with a lot of the things that I've heard in reference to Dogman. So it's just more reason for validation.
Well, the fact that all these things that you've been experiencing, the fact that they line up with what you've heard, that just points towards the fact that they're genuine and real, so that's impressive. Wrapping the show up, with even the worst experience, there are positive things that can be taken from them. Did your son's encounter teach you anything about yourself?
Well, I think it taught me to trust in myself more, to trust in the experience that I have had. Like, for instance, I would go mountain biking on the trails around here. And last year, I started imagining when I would be on the trail by myself, surrounded by ravine and forest and waterfalls, and I would think, I wonder if there's anything out here that could just jump out at me. And it's not like I normally think like that. I'm biking. I'm not really thinking of anything. I'm thinking like, oh my God, I want this to stop. I'm tired or whatever. But I'm really not thinking about that kind of thing. But these thoughts sometimes come into my head on my own. And so how has it changed me? It's changed me in making me really just more aware of my surroundings, paying attention to what my instincts say to me and following up on those instincts.
Because of that good mindset you have, a lot of things to do with this experience that Dylan had, and ones that you've had too, are going to be a lot easier for you to deal with than, say, for someone else who doesn't have such a healthy outlook on things. But keep in mind, down the road, if you or if Dylan have any trouble dealing with things like that, please do keep me on speed dial. I'm always here, and I'd be glad to help. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I guess just that, I came on Dogman Encounters Radio because I wanted to add my experience to the ever-increasing volume of testimony that I believe, just like many other subjects, will eventually become too hard to deny. And I know that any time I have had some scary experience, it sure did help when I could find and read about the subject or hear about other people's experiences. It helps to let you know that you aren't crazy. It helps when you are forced to, redefine your beliefs. And I think that's what this show offers. The show helps you to know that you aren't alone, and hopefully these stories can help someone going through their own process. I may not have actually seen a Dogman with my own eyes, but after having listened to the Dogman Encounters episodes and having spent a little time researching the topic, I cannot deny belief in their existence. Albert Einstein said, "It's entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, worlds are hidden which we are unaware." So, thanks for helping us broaden our perception, Vic. It's been very enjoyable being on your show, and thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been a blast having you on the show. Understand that the main purpose of the show is to grow by showing. Showing that so many other people have had experiences like this is a tremendous help for eyewitnesses such as Dylan and other people who have encounters with dogmen. So I'm just glad to hear that it's doing what it's supposed to do. Thanks again so much for coming on, Terry Ann. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Vic.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.